And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads on a Friday, Free to Choose Friday. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today. As always, a little bit of a late start, a lot going on. Good to be with you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, making sense out of nonsense. Thanks for joining us, being a part of the program. If you want to join into the festivities, we encourage you to email me, to tweet at me, to Facebook message me. Those are the ways to get in touch. You can go to the Facebook page, facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro. On Twitter, follow the page at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. And also, please do go ahead and check out the website, jimmyatthecrossroads.com, where you can access all of the content for the show, and also email yours truly. You got that contact info there. And please do subscribe to the YouTube channel on YouTube, Jimmy at the Crossroads, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. And folks, let me tell you that we really appreciate your support. Please do subscribe if you have not done so already, and share the show. Plus, follow, like, subscribe, all those good things for our friends at the Washington Examiner on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and, of course, at WashingtonExaminer.com. Once again, it is great to be with you on a Free to Choose Friday. It's a bit abnormal. We'll still bring you the intro tune that we like to have here on the program because, of course, Free to Choose Friday is in part to recognize our patron economist here on this program, Milton Friedman, who wrote the epic book, Free to Choose, and also had a television series of the same name. Now, today's a little different. We don't have any guest schedule. We're going to be offering up some thoughts and mostly talking about the RNC and the DNC. But make no mistake, this is still a point in time where being free to choose, especially free to choose our elected officials, is so critical. Let's take a look at how Milton Friedman would begin his show. So it is Free to Choose Friday because we, as human beings, are and of right ought to be free to think, free to act, and free to choose. And the stakes couldn't be any higher in the 2020 elections. We saw this play out. The Democratic National Convention, the Republican National Convention just wrapped up. The Republican one did, of course, last night. President Trump giving his formal acceptance speech of the Republican nomination. It was a long one where, according to Karl Rove, who put the text through an app on his computer, only about 10% of it was about Joe Biden. The rest was about his record and where he would like to take the country. Here's a snippet of President Donald Trump in his address last night. Not sure what's going on with the audio there. And a little bit of a glitch here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Occasionally that will happen. We noticed that the other day. Maybe you remove it from the software and then put it back in. It's odd occasionally when this sort of thing happens, but we'll see if we can get that clip because it's a pretty strong one where President Trump talks about how he kept his promises. Do we have it, Mr. Matoush? Let's see if this works.
From the moment I left my former life behind, and it was a good life, I have done nothing but fight for you. I did what our political establishment never expected and could never forgive, breaking the cardinal rule of Washington politics. I kept my promise.
I kept my promise, President Trump said. And then he went on to talk about all the different things that, as President of the United States, or throughout the speech, he talked about different things as President of the United States that he has achieved. This really was a lot more policy-centric of a convention than the Democrats. The Democrats were predominantly about how evil Donald Trump is, how he needs to go, how this is a battle of light versus darkness. That's what Joe Biden's convention was about, is sort of this high level, let's talk about the soul of the nation, and that is what is at stake. While President Trump was giving the clear impression throughout his convention that what's really at stake is the country, and especially from the policy standpoint. This is why he highlighted what his administration has done with regards to businesses and the economy. Yes, we're in the middle of a pandemic right now, and we have a recession afoot. The economic malaise continues. That's a given. But the reality is that prior to the pandemic hitting upon America's shores, the economy was thoroughly robust, and businesses were tremendously benefiting from that economy, from the policies of the Trump administration when it comes to scaling back regulation, cutting the tax burden on the American people and businesses. They highlighted business owners. They had so many average, everyday people at the Republican convention highlighting how they benefited from the last 3.5 years. And in a very diverse group as well. People from all sorts of backgrounds. And the Democrats claim to have a monopoly on the black vote. Well, we saw a wide array of African Americans who spoke at the Republican National Convention. We've seen them get out there and explain why they're supportive of a conservative and a Republican agenda in a way that's pretty striking. You saw in that clip there a snippet of, remember, the Navajo Nation, I think the vice president of the Navajo Nation who spoke. We've seen Hispanic leaders. The backgrounds were tremendous, highlighting that there's a lot more diversity in the Republican Party than many people think, than the perception is the Democrats have presented. And that's important because when you're doing a convention like this, you have to highlight what your party is about. Inclusivity is an important component of that. Striving to improve the economy is another key component of that. And of course, the successes, the benefits we'll talk about. The First Step Act, which was a tremendous achievement in terms of criminal justice reform brought on by the Trump administration and a Republican Congress. In fact, we've got a couple of clips on that I think are worth highlighting from this Republican National Convention that was focusing on these tremendous successes. In cut 4, for example, Alice Johnson, who was imprisoned in, I think, 1996, she was pardoned by President Trump, or her sentence was commuted, I think. And she was incredibly grateful. And she talked about not only what she experienced, but also in terms of the First Step Act, again, highlighting a real achievement. While the Democrats were constantly talking about light versus darkness and painting a picture of character, and that's it, the Republican National Convention was consistently discussing the issues of the day. Here's Alice Johnson's video and a snippet of her speech, which was quite powerful.
I'm free to hug my family. I'm free to start over. This is the greatest day of my life. My heart is just bursting with gratitude. I want to thank President Donald John Trump.
Almost all people said that criminal justice reform would never pass, but we came together as a group, we worked across party lines, and we got it done.
I'm an example of a woman who has been given a second chance in life. God bless you, and God bless America. When President Trump heard about me, about the injustice of my story, he saw me as a person. He had compassion, and he acted. Free in body thanks to President Trump, but free in mind thanks to the Almighty God. I couldn't believe it. I always remembered that God knew my name, even in my darkest hour, but I never thought a president would. When I was released on June 6, 2018, I ran across that road and hugged my grandchildren for the first time. I'll never forget that feeling. And then I remembered the promise I had made to the men and women I left behind, that I would never stop fighting for them, and I haven't. I'm using my voice to tell their stories, and I pray that my face reminds you of those forgotten faces. 6 months after President Trump granted me a second chance, he signed the First Step Act into law. It was real justice reform, and it brought joy, hope, and freedom to thousands of well-deserving people. I hollered, hallelujah! My faith in justice and mercy was rewarded.
So just to be clear, it was indeed that her sentence was commuted by President Trump after being sentenced to life in prison, serving 21 years in federal prison for cocaine trafficking back in the mid-late 90s. He commuted her sentence and also signed the First Step Act into law. Senator Tim Scott, in Cut 8, also highlighted in his speech some of these achievements and presented a contrast with the Democratic Party.
Joe Biden said if a black man didn't vote for him, he wasn't truly black. Joe Biden said black people are a monolithic community. It was Joe Biden who said poor kids can be just as smart as white kids. And while his words are one thing, his actions take it to a whole new level. In 1994, Biden led the charge on a crime bill that put millions of black Americans behind bars. President Trump's criminal justice reform law fixed many of the disparities Biden created and made our system more fair and just for all Americans. Joe Biden also failed our nation's historically black colleges and universities, heaping blame on them as they fought to ensure our young folks had access to higher education. Once again, to clean up Joe Biden's mess, President Trump signed into law historically high funding for HBCUs, as well as a bill to give them permanent funding for the first time ever.
Permanent funding for the first time ever, highlighting some of these relevant achievements, not with the Democratic president, but with President Trump serving in that post. It's really something when we think about the fact that President Trump really wanted to highlight the achievements of his administration in this Republican National Convention repeatedly. That's what it was about. He wasn't hiding from his record, hiding from his agenda. He was talking about it. Again, the Democrats were just having the light versus darkness. They were trying to channel Yoda or something. Fear the darkness, vote for the light. What they don't understand is the light is, as Nathan Matoush, our producer extraordinaire, has pointed out from yours truly mentioning this before, the light of the right. But truly, this isn't just about platitudes. This is about the real world impact of policies on the economy, on public safety, and so much more. In the next segment, we will talk about the stark difference between the RNC and the DNC when it comes to the violence and mayhem in our streets. When you see riots and looting for months, and only this week the Democrats are sort of starting to condemn it with more forceful language, to recognize that there is a need to address what's happening here across our country. They're only now finally addressing it. Mr. Matoush, do we have the Daniel Cameron clip lined up or no? Okay, so I guess we don't have that. But Daniel Cameron is a 34-year-old attorney general from Kentucky. And he gave a truly dynamic and hopeful speech about, and he's 34, he's a millennial, about why he is a conservative in essence, why he believes passionately in America, and of course his view on the current administration. And also about the idea that Democrats have had a monopoly of sorts on the black vote. And the reality is that we have seen diversity here in this convention. We also saw something else that's very clear. And that is the way in which they decided to structure and format this convention. So in the speeches, you saw a coherent message that was consistently about, here are the successes, here's the agenda, here's what we're pleased about in terms of the progress made under President Trump, and here are the things that we are concerned about, particularly right now, what we're seeing in terms of law and order and the economy. The need to get the economic gears rolling again. There were some consistent messages there. There was another consistent, subtle message, the subtextual message, and that is, of course, what I was talking about a moment ago, in terms of showcasing that the Republican Party is a far more diverse, vibrant party that is far more inclusive than the media and the Democrats would have you believe. But here's the thing. When it comes to the convention, It's also about the way in which you format and create a sort of coherent narrative. What you'll notice is a key distinction here. And that is the Democrats were basically phoning in all their speeches. They were all videos from different locations. We had John Kasich standing at a fork in the road. Like he's at a crossroads. We were here at the crossroads. He wanted to pretend that he was at the crossroads. And every other speaker, with a couple exceptions, wasn't even speaking like a speaking venue. They were sending video messages from various locations in their home communities or what have you. Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris, they both spoke in an empty room, basically, but they spoke in front of a podium in a venue that looks like it could be them speaking. Contrast this with the Republican National Convention. The Republican National Convention had some of that. We saw some videos that came into the RNC that were pre-cut. But we also saw videos, well, the live footage, mostly live, I believe, of speaker after speaker after speaker coming up to a podium in the same location, giving some sort of cohesiveness. You see Ben Carson, HUD secretary right there, in the same location that we saw most of the speakers address their audiences. Then you got Melania Trump there. This is where we saw things a little different. On Tuesday in the Rose Garden, Melania Trump spoke, the First Lady. On Thursday, Vice President Mike Pence addressed the audience from, on Wednesday rather, addressed the audience from Baltimore. And on Thursday, last night, President Trump was in the South Lawn. And that's where he gave his speech. Now, all three of those were before live in-person audiences, which certainly added a vibrancy and an energy. But what you notice here is that you have a cohesive sort of narrative and something that seems like everything is put together. Also with the videos. You had the pre-cut videos that showcased different people and their experiences and successes. You had President Trump meeting with various people positively impacted by his administration and their policies. So it certainly is an encouraging thing to see that unfold in a way where you could actually follow sort of a narrative, and it seemed like things were interconnected with one another, as opposed to a sort of diffusion. You had a few settings that people were giving live speeches from, or consistently in front of a podium. And then you had some videos that were pre-cut in terms of video messages. And then you had some pre-cut, very well done videos making some sort of point or highlighting an achievement or something along those lines. And then you had, of course, the live audience aspect for Melania Trump, President Trump, and Vice President Mike Pence. And I think that it was much superior from the standpoint of a cohesive, coherent convention that was much more substantive, was much more issue-oriented, and policy-oriented, was far more positive and uplifting overall, and also had the right kind of visual dynamics and interconnection that needs to be the case for this kind of a remote convention. Instead of having a live audience for everybody in a big arena, we're seeing this COVID convention, a little different, but the way in which the Trump administration, or rather the Trump campaign, went about this, I thought hit the right marks. I want to get a quick reaction as well from our producer extraordinaire here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, Nathan Matoush, who joins me now and did have the occasion to watch some of the convention this past week. Mr. Matoush, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Jimmy. Great to be back on again. We saw the battle, and the battle has been set, the DNC and the RNC. I did manage to watch a few moments of it. Thought it was great. Thought the speeches were really engaging, and felt feel like I got those goosebumps, and the goosebumps that we need, I feel.
Yeah, well, and the way in which it went, I thought was very positive. I mean, there are some things that I disagreed with. I mean, I'm not, as you know, I'm not a fan of President Trump's trade war. I think we need to be tough on China, but I'm not a fan with the trade war with China, with some of the trade deals and so forth. So there are some elements of the convention where I disagreed, particularly on the policy. But from the tone perspective and from the presentation perspective and from the messaging standpoint, I'm all about messaging. From the messaging standpoint, I think it hit the right marks.
Yeah, I think so too. And you mentioned that a lot of the DNC was really just an attack on Trump. Trump is an evil man. We need to get this man out of office. And I feel
the
like
dark side, he is.
yeah. It just it felt like that. I definitely saw a lot more accomplishments, I think, presented in the RNC compared to the DNC. And like you were saying before, probably about, President Trump talked maybe 10% about Joe Biden. The rest of it was about his accomplishments. The rest of it was about who he is as a president, what he's done for the nation, how he's inspired people. And I thought the message was just very clear. And the diversity in there. The Democrats always present the view that, hey, the Republicans, everyone's all white. There's not a lot of white people, not a lot of diversity. And I think the Republican National Convention really debunked that theory of the Democrats, because we saw diversity of all over. I love some of these speeches. Vernon Jones, Herschel Walker. I mean, they were just inspiring, and they really laid out how President Trump is not who the media presents him to be. President Trump is a man who has stuck with them, and a man who, quite frankly, has inspired him. I also liked Kim Klacik. I thought she did outstanding. But once again, Jimmy, just I thought it was a lot more motivational, a lot more patriotic, and it was great.
Since you mentioned Kim Klacik, who is running for Congress in Baltimore, if I recall correctly, I think she's on the Baltimore City Council currently. But in Cut 6, let's drop that in, please, Mr. Batushin. Cut 6, Kim Klacik gives her video message. This was an example of a video message where she talks a little bit about what Democrats have done to her community. And I think that helps to also paint that stark picture, the reality that the Republicans were emphasizing in terms of what's really happening in inner city America. Here's a sample of that.
Let me remind you, the Democrats have controlled this part of Baltimore City for over 50 years, and they have run this beautiful place right into the ground. Abandoned buildings, liquor stores on every corner, drug addicts, guns on the street. That's now the norm in many neighborhoods. You'd think Maryland taxpayers would be getting a whole lot since our taxes are out of control. Instead, we're paying for decades of incompetence and corruption. Sadly, the same cycle of decay exists in many of America's Democrat-run cities. And yet the Democrats still assume that black people will vote for them, no matter how much they let us down and take us for granted. We're sick of it. We're not going to take it anymore. The days of blindly supporting the Democrats are coming to an end. In Baltimore, we have the highest number of black Republicans in the entire country running for office this election cycle. Joe Biden believes we can't think for ourselves, that the color of someone's skin dictates their political views. We're not buying the lies anymore. You and your party have neglected us for far too long. We want safety in our neighborhoods. We want to make the most of the federal opportunity zone I'm standing in right now in West Baltimore. We want higher paying jobs and more business opportunities. We want lower taxes. We want school choice. We want a chance to get ahead, not just get by. That's what President Trump promised, and that's what President Trump delivered.
Very well put, very effective. She also came out with that tremendous video that just went absolutely viral, talking about and showing what's happening on the streets of Baltimore. But Nathan, to your point, she really did present a cogent message that hit with the themes of this convention.
Oh, yeah. I think she hit on a lot of points in the fact that the Democrat Party has taken the black vote for granted for so many years. And I think she really laid out the fact that I think this is the great awakening for African-American voters, and the fact that they might roll Republican possibly. I just
it seems
think,
that way, at least.
Yeah, it just seems that way. And, just well said, well spoken by
Kim Klacik,
Klacik, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The convention was was a different animal, so to speak, from the Democratic National Convention. That's for darn sure. All right, Nathan Matoush, thanks for popping on real quick here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Always great to get your thoughts, my friend.
You bet, Jimmy. Keep showing the folks the light of the right. Like
Absolutely. That's the real light, folks. The light of the right. Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about one aspect of the DNC RNC differential that was so striking, that was so apparent, so obvious. You could not ignore it. And that is the focus of the RNC on the violence in our streets, the mayhem, the rioting, the looting, the violence. A focus of the Republican National Convention was emphasizing that. The Democratic Convention didn't talk about it. And now this week, we're starting to see Democrats talk more about it. We'll get to that coming up in the next segment here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, engaging intelligent talk in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Don't go anywhere.
Do you suffer from feelings of entitlement, self-righteousness, and arrogance? Fits of resentment, anger, and hypocrisy? Terror that the world is going to end, or even worse, that the world isn't going to end and that things are going to get better? A deep need to point fingers, deflect, or deny. Uncontrollable stress, frustration, or depression. Fear of recession, fear of no recession. Then you may have PTDS, or President Trump Derangement Syndrome. Fortunately, there's new Magatol, the proven cure for PTDS. Just one Magatol a day realigns your sensibilities by bypassing erratic brain signals to amplify the logic receptors. Talk to your Obamacare doctor today to see if Magatol is right for you. Recommended dose of reality is at least once daily. Warning snowflakes. Side effects of Magatol may include optimism, hope for the future, good feelings about your country, accepting economic prosperity, renewed faith in capitalism, and admitting that things aren't so bad under Trump. If you discover you're allergic to common sense, stop use immediately and contact your doctor. Relax. Breathe. It's Magatol. From the makers of Triggerol.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Hi, Jimmy. This is Bill Clinton calling your secret hotline here. I got to keep it down because I'm calling from the doghouse here in Chappaqua, New York at our place. Don't even ask. All you need to know is she's on the warpath again. Oh, boy. Hillary yelled at me for listening to you. I have to do it in secret. But I really admire your show. I really do. I'm calling to wish you the best. All the best. In the future and even right now. Oh, here she comes. Listen, I got to go, but you got a great show, and you're going to do very well in the future, I'll tell you that much. Oh, my God, I know it's going to happen. She's going to have me read chapters of her book again, put us both to sleep. I know what the title of her darn book should have been. Should have been called How I Dropped the Ball on the 2-Yard Line with 3 seconds left in the Super Bowl. I got to go.
Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics.
Are you all right with being a shark maverick? Was it okay to team up with you?
I'm good, man. We're a part. It's a partnership. We're like this, Jimmy. I got you.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense.
Hey, Jimmy Sengenberger. On a scale of 1 to 10, how America are you feel today after last night's RNC wrap-up? Jimmy Sengenberger, folks.
Welcome back. I'm always feeling at 10 on the America scale. Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire, once again joining us as producer here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, working the Matoush magic. Good to be with you on a Free to Choose Friday, where we're focusing more on just some of the dynamics of the RNC and the DNC and the two big differences, the key distinctions, rather, between these two conventions in a variety of different areas. But one that was most stark, I think, was the way in which the Republicans talked about the mayhem going on across the country in terms of the violent so-called protests and the devastation that they're causing our communities, contrasted with the Democrats who just, it seems, avoided the topic altogether. And I want to play a clip. This is cut 2. President Trump making his strong points about what, in his view, is sort of the Democrat standpoint, what they're allowing in the country from his standpoint. Here's what he had to say.
At the Democrat National Convention, Joe Biden and his party repeatedly assailed America as a land of racial, economic, and social injustice. So tonight I ask you a simple question. How can the Democrat Party ask to lead our country when it spends so much time tearing down our country? In the left's backward view, they do not see America as the most free, just, and exceptional nation on earth. Instead, they see a wicked nation that must be punished for its sins. Our opponents say that redemption for you can only come from giving power to them. This is a tired anthem spoken by every repressive movement throughout history. But in this country, we don't look to career politicians for salvation. In America, we don't turn to government to restore our souls. We put our faith in Almighty God.
So in a moment, we're going to dive into how stark these differences really are. That's President Trump sort of setting the tone there about his discussion. And we're going to talk about what we're seeing across the country and how the Democrats were avoiding it last week versus how the Republicans now have been making their convention centered on it. And also centered on this idea that, look, America is a wonderful nation that always needs to improve. And we're always striving to improve as a people. That is what being patriotic Americans is about, too. It's about showing pride in your country. Which is why I'm excited about what we'll see here in the photo of the week. We'll get to all the content in a moment, but I want to get to our photo of the week on this Friday edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads, brought to you by Joshua Sharf Photography. Imagine this on the wall of your newly reopened or newly opened doctor's office, co-working space, or conference room. This photo of the week is a stunning, look at that, really cool view of the United States, the flag of the United States on the Brooklyn Bridge. If you were feeling patriotic this week, watching the Republican National Convention and the honoring of our country and our flag, this is the kind of image you want on your wall. I mean, look, whether you're looking for something bold for an investment firm, soothing for a doctor's office, or thematic for a co-working space, Joshua Sharf Photography has the artwork you will love. It's truly phenomenal. You might be decorating your own space or an interior designer working on someone else's project. Either way, give Joshua Sharf Photography a call at 303-520-7503 or log on to photo.jsharf.com today. From idea to proof and digital to the fine print, Joshua will produce the perfect art to fulfill your creative vision for you and your client. Check him out. Phenomenal guy. Phenomenal outdoor photography. Joshua Sharf Photography, photo.jsharf.com. I really love that picture, too. I mean, the patriotism right there before you. That could be on your wall, by the way. But the patriotism that we're feeling this week for much of what happened in the convention, I think is pretty apparent in a lot of ways. But look, the reality is that we have two different perceptions of what's happening in America that were on display last week compared with this week. Last week, the Democrats hardly said anything. I didn't think they said anything about the looting, the riots, the attacks, the violence, all the things that have been happening from these so-called protests. Now, this week, they're changing their tune a bit. Former Vice President Joe Biden has said that he condemns the burning of businesses and so forth that have been happening in Kenosha, Wisconsin, in the aftermath of the police shooting death of Jacob Blake. He's speaking out then this week, but last week he didn't say a peep about anything that was going on in our streets. This semblance of fear that is gripping a lot of America when they're wondering if their business is going to stay intact. When they're wondering if they're going to be able to keep their business. When they're wondering if they're going to be safe as all this mayhem spreads. Democrats finally talking about it. Last week they didn't. This week, the Republican National Convention put a big spotlight on this violence. In cut 3, President Trump talks a little bit about this sort of topic as well.
The most dangerous aspect of the Biden platform is the attack on public safety. The Biden-Bernie manifesto calls for abolishing cash bail, immediately releasing 400,000 criminals onto the streets and into your neighborhoods. When asked if he supports cutting police funding, Joe Biden replied, yes, absolutely. When Congresswoman Ilhan Omar called the Minneapolis Police Department a cancer that is rotten to the root, Biden wouldn't disavow her support and reject her endorsement. He proudly displayed it shortly later on his website. Displayed it in big letters. Make no mistake, if you give power to Joe Biden, the radical left will defund police departments all across America. They will pass federal legislation to reduce law enforcement nationwide. They will make every city look like Democrat-run Portland, Oregon. No one will be safe in Biden's America. My administration will always stand with the men and women of law enforcement.
Now, not only did President Trump talk about it himself and some of the other speakers, but certain speakers provided personal and powerful testimonials to what's going on and helped to really put forward this dichotomy between what the Trump administration, what his view and his administration's view of law and order and security and safety is versus the Democrats. One of the most heart-wrenching stories is about David Dorn, the retired police officer who was killed while defending a young friend and mentee's business. He was killed by so-called protesters. And his wife, Ann Dorn, sent in a truly powerful and emotional video message that is bar none one of the most powerful, and there were a lot of them, most powerful speeches at the Republican National Convention. But what this speech does is it underscores two things. Number one, watch for this. What is the difference that they're trying to present from a messaging standpoint at this convention about the Republican view on safety versus the Democratic view on safety?
It was a violent night in St. Louis. 4 officers were shot. Others were hit with rocks and fireworks. At least 5 businesses were damaged, looted, or set on fire. As the Officer Wellness Coordinator and CIT Coordinator with the police department, I was keenly aware of the rioting and spent the evening getting ready to mobilize support for officers who were impacted. After I'd gone to bed, David received a call from Lee's Alarm Company. The front door of the pawn shop had been breached. This time he didn't wake me up to tell me. He probably knew I would have tried to stop him or insist on going with him. As I slept, looters were ransacking the shop. They shot and killed David in cold blood and then live streamed his execution and his last moments on earth. David's grandson was watching the video on Facebook in real time, not realizing he was watching his own grandfather dying on the sidewalk. How did we get to this point where so many young people are callous and indifferent towards human life? This isn't a video game where you can commit mayhem and then just hit reset and bring all the characters back to life. David is never coming back to me. He was murdered by people who didn't know and just didn't care. He would have done anything to help them. Violence and destruction are not legitimate forms of protest. They do not safeguard Black lives. They only destroy them.
That was powerful and emotional. And it underscores something very critical, is that there has been a narrow band of Black lives that the Democrats are talking about versus all Black lives. That is to say, they're focusing on a certain aspect of the issue, but not all. I mean, is it not the case that David Dorn's Black Life mattered? Just as one of many examples. How about all of the young Black children who have been killed in our streets in recent weeks tied to these protests? It is unspeakable what we are seeing everywhere around this country. And having Ann Dorn speak sent a clear message on the one hand about the RNC and its differences with the DNC, but also sent an important message that Republicans absolutely care about Black lives. There's no doubt about that. Democrats do not have a monopoly on that because they put out a hashtag. David Dorn's life is one of many Black lives that matters. And by the way, when the George Floyd killing happened, Americans of all stripes were outraged. Outraged at a man, and a Black man especially, having his neck squished by a man's knee. A heinous act on the part of a police officer. The whole nation was outraged with that, conservatives included, Republicans included. And yet they've been able to paint this picture that, no, it was just one group, the left, that was outraged. not the case at all. We're at a point in time where they had a moment. They had a moment when George Floyd died to really bring about reform and change. And instead, the whole perception has been changed. The reality is different now in terms of what could have been done versus what has been done in terms of the violence and mayhem in the streets used to get a message across, I guess. Although, as we've talked about in this program, it's no longer about a message. Having Ann Dorn present her powerful story shows that President Trump, this is number 2, shows that President Trump supports the police and supports public safety. It's not just about the message difference between the RNC and the DNC. It's about the agenda difference and the focus on making sure that there is safety in our communities. The fact that we are still seeing businesses destroyed 3 months later should be chilling to every American. Now, what's so interesting as well is the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans on how they've been presenting things on this issue. So Joe Biden this week just started finally talking about how he is started condemning in strong words the looting and the violence and the chaos in the streets. Relatively strong words. Okay. Over the weekend here in Colorado, I'm broadcasting from, Jared Polis, Colorado's governor, and the mayor of Denver, Michael Hancock, both finally used stronger language to condemn destruction, mayhem that was going on in Denver over the weekend. Months later. Now, why is this? Don Lemon, let's go to cut 13 here, please, Mr. Matoush. Don Lemon over on CNN has changed his tune. He's been hiding, not addressing the riots and violence or downplaying it that's been going on in our streets. Well, now, earlier this week, he had an awakening at the same time as Joe Biden had an awakening, at the same time as Colorado Governor Jared Polis had an awakening. They're waking up, folks, to what's happening and recognizing, oh, the Democrats, Don Lemon says, have a blind spot here that they cannot ignore. Roll the tape.
The Democrats want to define what we see around the country every time there's one of these cases, like now in Kenosha. The symptom is the protest. The symptom is the riot and opportunists. You have the bad actors, and then you have people who went there for the right reason and now did the wrong things. It's all true. And they're rioters, not protesters, and they're criminals as a result, and they are exhibiting what they say they oppose. But to Trump, the riots are the problem. See, and this is the key, Don. This is why the polling is shifting. Maria, I don't know if we have it to put up right now, but you'll see from June till now, we're seeing voters shift in terms of how they see these incidents. And they see them more now about riots than about legitimate protests.
The riots and the protests have become indistinguishable.
Here it is.
And again, the only thing that's sticking in focus groups. And that's why I said that that this is a blind spot for Democrats. They don't want they don't want to believe it. And when you say what you said just now about, what is the symptom of whatever, that's all well and good, but you can't put that on a bumper sticker. Do you know what I'm saying?
Blind spot for Democrats. Not CNN, not Don Lemon, not Chris Cuomo for weeks and weeks, but the Democrats. Okay, yes. It is, in fact, a blind spot for the Democrats. At a minimum. But it seems like it's something they have not wanted to even address. Let's put up that poll that CNN was just showing. After George Floyd's death in Minneapolis, do you think the demonstrations are mostly legitimate, people acting unlawfully and unsure? Look at that increase in terms of people acting unlawfully and mostly legitimate. That's one poll there. Then let's put up pick one, this Rasmussen Reports poll, which shows some stark numbers that are helping to demonstrate a change in tune here. 72% voters concerned about the growing level of violent protests. 43% are very concerned. 62% say the growing level of violent protests is important to their vote. 35% saying it is very important. And these numbers keep rising. This is increasingly a law and order election in many respects because people are noticing the destruction of businesses. Insurance isn't enough. I've seen video of shopkeepers who've just been devastated and saying insurance isn't enough. This isn't just something you can say, oh, you have insurance, so rely on that. Insurance doesn't cover a lot of things. It takes a long time to rebuild your business. What this shows is that if you support the violence, if you defend, at least defend or deflect from condemning the mayhem and the chaos and the destruction and the looting and the rioting and the attacks on these communities, then you are in effect condoning it and okay with it. And in effect, okay with our economy recovering even more slowly because you are allowing this to happen. And only now are Democrats starting to more or less speak out a little bit about it. Don Lemon this week, Chris Cuomo changing their tune, Joe Biden. But then you scratch your head when you hear a clip like this. Let's go to cut 9. This is Kamala Harris on Stephen Colbert's show a couple of nights ago. And you scratch your head wondering, okay, what is she really saying here when she says they're not going to stop?
Clear that I know that there are protests still happening in major cities across the United States. I'm just not seeing the reporting on it that I had
that's right.
for the first few weeks.
That's right. But they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop. And they're not, this is a movement, I'm telling you. They're not going to stop. And everyone beware, because they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And that should be, everyone should take note of that on both levels, that they're not going to let up, and they should not. And we should not.
You know, on Twitter, folks were saying, oh, you saw that smirk, you saw her statement. Is she just talking about the peaceful protests, or is she talking about what else has been going on in terms of the riots and the looting? And I have to say, it's hard to tell in that video. My guess is she's probably talking about the peaceful protesting, but what is the peaceful protesting now? To what extent is there actually peaceful protesting versus the riots that we have been seeing? We've experienced it here in Colorado. I've talked about the pro-police rally, Colorado, 6th annual Law Enforcement Appreciation Day rally, where we weren't able even to speak. Hardly got words in, hardly got music in. I was part of the band. And we saw fights break out instantaneously, in no time. When we were surrounded and swarmed in Civic Center Park. And guess what, folks? The police hardly did anything, and were even told to retreat, as we've talked about on this show. We're told to retreat, and one lieutenant bravely broke ranks and refused the order because he knew what would happen. My recollection is that there was only one arrest made. Only one arrest made at that rally, when it was completely shut down by a group of thugs organized by the Party for Socialism and Liberation. We hardly got started, folks, with the rally. That is what's happening, and what has been happening for months, and only now they are starting to talk about it. And even then, you wonder what they're really meaning, and if they really stand by their view, or if it's simply because the polls are now showing that Americans are growing with concern. And of course they should be growing with concern. Let's go to cut 11 here. Just last night, after the Republican National Convention, Rand Paul, senator from Kentucky, who spoke at the RNC on, I believe, Wednesday night. Rand Paul and his wife were walking back to their hotel, and they were completely surrounded and accosted by extremists. And here's some video of that occasion last night. So that's what was going on. He could hardly get by. Hardly, a United States senator could hardly get by in the middle of the night. And he knew what could come. We showed footage of Denver, completely unprovoked, when they swarmed a peaceful gathering for the 6th year. I've been participating in it for the past several years, and it was the 6th annual event. If that kind of thing can happen, of course, a United States senator should fear for the life of himself and his wife. In Cut 12, Rand Paul was on Fox and Friends today. And I want to break down this clip, so we'll pause it a couple times along the way. But Rand Paul told his story, and I absolutely agree with his perception. And keep in mind this, and he mentions it. Let's keep this in mind. Rand Paul introduced and wrote the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act. That was the instance where you had a black woman who was in her home, Breonna Taylor, and the police stormed in the middle of the night in a no-knock raid, and she ended up dead, and it was the wrong house. She was not even in the right apartment. And Senator Rand Paul put in this bill, which would ban no-knock raids. Keep that in mind as you watch this clip.
We came out of the speech
at the White House.
We looked into the street. Our hotel was only right across the street from the White House, but we couldn't go because the mob was already chasing people down that chose to go out that exit. So the Secret Service says, get on a bus and ride to the Trump Hotel. So we got on a bus. It took 45 minutes to get through all the mobs. We get there safely, and then we say we'll get an Uber to go all the way back where we came from, and we wanted to be dropped off at the hotel. But as we got close to it, the streets were blocked and no one would let us through. And what happened is there was 2 blocks, and I regret that I made this decision, but I said we're going to walk the 2 blocks. We walked 1 block, but as we walked 1 block, we could see some police in the distance, but we also saw a mob of about 30 people marching and yelling. They all of a sudden saw me right as we got to the policeman, fortunately, or I don't think we'd have survived. We got to the policeman, and the policeman, I don't think, recognized me. And as they came closer, they were shouting my name, and the crowd doubled to 60. And then it doubled again to 120. And as they were surrounding us, and it got closer and closer, and everybody kept pushing back, the policemen were forming a barricade with their bodies. I whispered to the policeman, they know who I am. You've got to get reinforcements. It's going to get worse. He called for reinforcements, but we didn't get any reinforcements. We waited, but the crowd was getting bigger and bigger and pushing in. They were yelling threats. They were trying to push the police over to get to me. They were grabbing at us. And it got worse and worse and worse. And then finally we decided to make a move. I said, we've got to move. If there's not going to be reinforcements, we have to try to get to the hotel, which was another block.
Pause it.
And they were shouting.
So as we watch Rand Paul there telling that story, you can understand why he would have the perception that he did in terms of his own safety. Police reinforcements were not coming. It was just him with a couple of officers and his wife. And they needed to get through that crowd. And at least the officer who he was clinging on to make sure that they were all okay and all together, that officer was there providing the kind of safety that he needed. As a United States Senator in Washington, D.C., these so-called protesters were surrounding him, yelling at him, threatening him, and making it difficult for them to walk. They were being obstructive. Let's continue.
threats, to us, to kill us, to hurt us, but they're also shouting, say her name, Breonna Taylor. And it's like, you couldn't reason with this mob, but I'm actually the author of the Breonna Taylor law to end no-knock raids. So the irony is lost on these idiots that they're trying to kill the person who's actually trying to get rid of no-knock raids. And they were shouting and screaming and just, these people were unhinged.
Pause it there.
But I can't tell you
Let me go back to the Breonna Taylor Act. Justice for Breonna Taylor Act. Senator Paul, this is according to the press release, quote, Senator Paul's Justice for Breonna Taylor Act would require federal law enforcement officers to provide notice of their authority and purpose before they could execute a warrant, and it would require the same of any state or local law enforcement agency that receives funds from the Department of Justice, which is pretty much every local and state law enforcement agency. Saying if you're going to get money from the federal government, or if you are a federal law enforcement officer, no-knock raids are forbidden, and you must have a demonstrable warrant. You must have an authority and a purpose laid out before you can execute such a warrant, effectively ending no-knock raids. Let's continue.
I'm not sure we would have made it. So as we're walking, sort of surrounded by the police, they're attempting to push the police over to get to me. So at one point, they push a policeman backwards. He stumbles, and he's trying to catch his balance, and I catch the back of his flak jacket to stabilize him and, make sure that he's okay, because he's our defense. I mean, if he's down, the mob's loose on us. And you've seen the pictures of what they do to you. If the police are not there, if you defund the police, if we become Portland, if America becomes Portland, what's going to happen is people are going to be pummeled and kicked in the head and left senseless on the curb. That would have happened to us. I promise you, had we not had the D.C. police to support us, I mean, we are thankful that we have police, and we've got to wake up. We can't have the whole country. We can't have Joe Biden rule the country and have no police. I mean, we can't walk down the street in D.C. safely now. That's how bad it is.
So what's interesting here is Rand Paul's experience that last night after the convention events, festivities wrapped up at the White House, underscore the points made in the convention about what we're seeing in the streets across the country. You look at President Trump's address, and he talks about the importance of safety and stakes claim to the idea that the Republican Party is advocating for the safety of Americans, not the Democratic Party when it comes to police. So that's his campaign point. Well, then Rand Paul, a United States senator, is accosted like this, obstructed in these ways, and it proves the point about what's happening in our country right now. But I want to put up pick 2. Because Chris Hayes is a host over on MSNBC, and he put out a tweet this morning. And I found it so striking, especially since I had been to Tea Party events in 2011 and so forth. I remember saying this during the Tea Party protests, and I'll say it now. Screaming at elected officials is quite literally one of the blessings of liberty and living in a free society. Let me read that again. Screaming at elected officials is quite literally one of the blessings of liberty and living in a free society. Mr. Matoush, please put up footage again of what happened last night with Rand Paul. Because this is not just screaming at a politician. What happened during the Tea Party movement, you had some examples where people would show up to town halls and they would scream at politicians expressing their anger. But they wouldn't surround them. They wouldn't accost them. They wouldn't obstruct them. There isn't a history of Tea Partiers showing up at the rally of political opponents, I guess, surrounding them, swarming them, attacking them, starting to beat on them. There aren't instances of Tea Party rallies spontaneously breaking out and destroying businesses and looting property and beating people up on the regular. That's just not what's happening. This kind of description does not fit the Tea Party movement at all. This was an instance of so-called protesters trying to obstruct and harm, threatening a United States senator and his wife as they try to work their way through that crowd with limited law enforcement support present for them. 1, 2 officers. And that is screaming and exercising your rights. There is no right to obstruct, to attack, to accost, whether it's a United States senator or somebody who's showing up to their business or a rally. Of course, Rand Paul should have been fearful. We've seen this pattern of behavior going on at these riots. And the idea that this is equivalent in any way to anything that happened during the Tea Party movement is absurd. Chris Hayes is dishonest in every way, shape, or form with that tweet. Yes, screaming at a politician is one thing. Doing what they did last night or have been doing all over the place is entirely different. And that tweet, let's put it back up, please, Mr. Matoush. That tweet of Chris Hayes on MSNBC again emphasizes the dichotomy that the Republican convention was presenting between the Republicans and the Democrats, the left and the right. That's what that tweet exemplifies. Because when you look at that video of what happened to Rand Paul, or you look at all the other things that we've been seeing, it's abundantly apparent. It's abundantly apparent that they're sowing this mayhem, that there's a strategy here, that it is intentional, and that it is not an expression of rights. Because guess what, folks? And this is Free to Choose Friday, so it's a fundamental point, and you know it's a great one to end on, too. My rights stop when they start trampling upon your rights. And the fundamental role of government in the first place is to protect my rights from others and your rights from others. That's what America is about. That's what the Constitution is about. That's why we have our systems and structures that we do. Because we need to protect individual rights. That's the fundamental cornerstone of our society. And when you have people at these riots shouting, F property, F property, you know that their goal is to advance an extreme left agenda, full stop. And it is not that they are trying to advance some just or noble cause. It is that they do not believe in property. They will vandalize it. They will destroy it. They will burn down businesses, crush people's dreams. And they will do it because they don't believe in the importance of private property or individual rights. If they did, not only would they not say things like F property, but they wouldn't erode on other people's rights, transcend on other people's rights. They wouldn't destroy people's businesses, prevent them from being able to speak or play music, prevent them from being able to walk to their hotel. That's not justifiable. That's not right. That's not Tea Party-esque. That's anti-American and un-American. Full stop. And I just wonder when a guy like Chris Hayes will get the message. Don Lemon at least seemed to this week. Wonder how many more people will start at least looking at the polling data and changing their tune more. Some are, a little bit, but still have a ways to go. But more and more people, more and more Americans are waking up to this, and it should be a teachable moment about the importance and value of individual liberty and about why we should protect the rights of the individual including property rights, including their safety and well-being. That is it for us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, once again in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Thank you for joining us, for subscribing, sharing our content, all those good things. I'll be on the radio tomorrow, 5 to 8 p.m. here in Denver, News Talk 710 at KNUS. Check out the Jimmy Sengenberger Show. We will be back here on Jimmy at the Crossroads this coming Monday. Do not miss it. Have a great weekend. Oh, my thanks, of course, to Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire. Great job today, my friend. We will see you back here on Monday. Stay well, stay safe, and have a great weekend. Of course, may God bless America.